Hello po, Sir Mon. I just would like to inform you that we had a power service interruption here in the main campus. So we're trying to get back po. So I would like to let's have at least 15-minute water break habang bumabalik po yung ating mga kasamahan sa Office of the Vice President for Research and Extension. Thank you.
Dr. Mon, you can be heard.
Gasum ako, po na baga dapat kasubago pa nag-inform ka naman ko.
Dr. Mon, please mute your mic. Okay, let me go back to screen sharing. Okay, let me continue with the interview portion of the ethnography. So, this Magda, the New Zealand bride, could not make up her mind. So, she sought divine guidance according to her. Humingi ako ng gabay sa Panginoon. She says, I prayed I have to settle down. Now, I don't know which one. Marami siyang manliligaw. But if I go to this person, I think this is all right. Just give me a sign. The sign would be if I'm given a visa, because at that time it was very strict. It's not very easy to come. So you need prayers as well. Actually, I said to the Santo Niño, if I got married to this man and given a visa, when we celebrate 5 years, I will do it in January as a Thanksgiving for the Santo Niño, for giving me Bruce, not his real name, in my life. And I'll introduce the Sinulog in my new home. And since she was granted a visa, not only that, but she was able to find a job. Then she began the tradition. She introduced the Sinulog in Christchurch. So it's very, very interesting that, coming from your observation into your field notes, into the actual ethnography. The context of migrant strangerhood and marginality within the host culture makes the church a symbolic representation of home, as well as a refuge. And as the home of sacred icons of devotions and remembered home-led traditional rituals, the church mediates the migrant's home memory of the past and the home longed for in the future, even as his or her actual home had been reconfigured by migration. And what do I mean by this now? Whenever people leave, like for example, you have a family, you leave your family, you migrate, and in your mind that is fixated. You have the memory of that family at the time you left. But try to take note, this is coming from Dr. Mon and Ellie. Life goes on. The home in your absence is being reconfigured. And you, as you go through your migration process and you settle down in a new area, you try to adapt to your new environment and find what we call substitute or surrogate family. And in this sense, when we talk about the migrant peoples in New Zealand, it becomes the church. Now, the funny part was that when I started my fieldwork and even when I was doing my research proposal, I actually never intended to look at religion. I was looking more at the push and pull of migration. What drives people off from their home origin countries? What attracts them to certain countries? What would be the pull of certain countries to Filipino migrants? Then I started my initial field work and I started looking around, looking for Filipinos in New Zealand at first, because I was doing my proposal at the University of Canterbury. I realized that the easiest way to find them is to go to the church. And I was thinking, why is it that it's easier to find them in the church? What makes the church so attractive? Then I started digging. Oh, they have big gatherings. They have Santa Cruzan, they have Simbang Gabi, and they have the Sinulog. So in that sense, why, like there would be a lot of secular things as well. They would have sports festivals. But this sports festival would always have a mass. Merong misa, merong pare lagi na nandun. So I was looking at the connection between the secular and the religious. And then I started asking around, especially when they feel pressured about sending money to their families back home. Bakit kailangan mong magpadala? Kasi pamilya ko sila eh. Okay, so pamilya mo sila, pero hindi mo ba pwedeng ipaliwanag sa kanila na mahirap magpadala? And then there goes the dilemma, because they feel it is their moral responsibility, that supporting the family is what the good Lord wants them to do. May mga religious underpinnings. Parang ang feeling nila, nagkakasala sila pag hindi sila nagpapadala sa kanilang mga pamilya. And so when I looked around at all the Filipinos in New Zealand, most of them are sending their pamangkins, their brothers and their sisters, and all the poor relatives to school. Marami silang sinusuportahan. And this, the very act of supporting their family is already reconfiguring the family. Most of the time, it creates actually dependency. Kaya nga, naririnig ko rin yung mga reklamo nila sa diaspora, yung diasporic circles. Akala nila tumatay tayo ng pera dito. Parang hindi nila maintindihan na mahirap din kumita dito sa New Zealand. Okay. So, in both cases, the home of their memory and the home they are creating in the diaspora are both being configured. Okay? One by their absence, the other by their presence. There are localizing efforts both by the transnational migrants and the locals taking divergent trajectories. One group performs homeland practices, and the other preserves or protects local practices. An equal power typifies relations between migrants and locals in terms of opportunities and benefits. And this is true in every other country. While most of the Filipinos I interviewed in New Zealand are mostly residents, okay? They are resident migrants, and they are able to participate in the political processes of New Zealand because New Zealand is that generous. The migrants I met in Singapore and Malaysia would have some social disparities. The professionals are treated well by the Singapore government, but the domestic workers and the contractual workers and the laborers are not. And therefore, there are contestations within the diaspora. When I was in Singapore, one Filipina manager told me, ayokong pumunta sa Lucky Plaza kasi baka mapagkamalan akong domestic worker. What she told me. And I tried to keep a poker face as hopefully as best as I can. But I was actually amazed that among Filipinos, there is this disgust with their co-Filipinos in terms of occupation. In Christchurch, the situation is different. Most of the newcomers in Christchurch at the time, when I was at the University of Canterbury, were nurses and caregivers. So in order to understand them better, I saw an ad advertising for a caregiver position. So I was thinking, why don't I go through a process of application? Sige, apply din ako na maging caregiver. And I was thinking, siguro hindi naman ako papasa. Ano bang alam ko sa caregiving, no? And so I went for this interview. I was amazed that after the interview, they told me that I can actually work as a caregiver. I will be given some training of sorts, but I will be like a casual, no? Yung parang pag merong regular employee na absent, ako yung ilalagay nila. Parang substitute, no? Substitute na caregiver. So for about a year, no? I actually knew what Filipino caregivers go through. Ito yung sinasabi ni Ellie, ni Suyan, to walk in the shoes of the people you are researching on. Although, of course, I don't know the paths of other migrants in New Zealand. But I do know what happens and what the caregivers go through in order for them to be able to send some money to their families. And being a student, baka naman isipin nyo talagang nagtrabaho ng full-time caregiver si Tondo. Hindi po. We are only allowed to work about 20 hours a week. And some of the 20 hours I used for the university because I was also a tutor. So I would actually just go for caregiving for about probably 16 hours or 8 hours a week. Locals enjoy the protection of nation-state regulations and policies and are supported structurally by established system support. It is the peripheral and disadvantaged position with a multicultural but unequal field that diaspora identity construction takes place. And it's very, very important. According to the Filipino brides who came, it was very lonely in New Zealand at the time when they started coming 1970s, 1980s. And so what they did was, when they see each other in church, they would schedule barbecues, no? Magsasama-sama sila, magsasalo-salo sila sa pagkain. And because they were discriminated upon, that the New Zealanders looked down on them as what they call mail order brides, okay? In quotation mark, mail order brides. They form a solidarity. It is actually in this common, experience of being discriminated upon that the diaspora in Christchurch and in some parts of New Zealand was born. They felt that they had some common things together as brides of New Zealanders. In Singapore and Malaysia, it is actually in the church wherein the domestic workers can find some rest. During their day offs, they don't have anywhere to go. So they would go to the church and see each other, eat some Filipino food, pray a little bit, but most of the time, spend the whole day socializing with each other. Scholarly discourses on Filipino transnational migration cannot simply be restricted to a purely economic perspective. That is part of my findings. Because migration for Filipinos is enmeshed with the sacred. In both New Zealand and Singapore, the interconnection between religion, migration, and diaspora has been repetitively demonstrated. The devotional ritual and prayers asking the holy patrons for visa approval and good jobs, the ethical and moral responsibility of sending remittances to the family, attachment to sacred icons and symbols, church attendance, and ritual participation in the diaspora. These are all happening. You go into the car of one Filipino, you would see a rosary somewhere, within the car. I remember hitching a ride with a New Zealand bride with her husband, with her new husband. And the husband kept on complaining that, there is this Santo Nino in front of him while he's driving, looking at him, and that was really funny for me, because the foreigners just humor their brides, and he was saying it in a bit of fun. Hindi naman niya pinagagalitan yung asawa niya, niloloko niya. Look at this, no? So one fellow is looking at me. Look at me, look at me. So, sige. And these Filipino brides are able to get, maneuver some points of affection from their new husbands because the new husbands actually tolerate their religiosity. So, in this sense, I'm saying that among Filipinos, migration is not just economic, it is also religious. Religion and the sacred economy it generates provides an understanding of the Filipino migrants' exercise of agency, ethical and moral commitments to the family, risk-taking, resiliency, religiosity, attachment to sacred icons, church attendance, ritual participation, and community feasting. Why do I say it is a sacred economy? Case in point, the Santo Nino icon being used in the celebration of the Sinulog in New Zealand. It was ordered in the Philippines, in-order sa Pilipinas, dinala sa New Zealand. Pagdala sa New Zealand, hindi inilagay sa baggage compartment. The Santo Nino had a seat in the airplane. O diba? Economy yan. Diba? And of course, the donation came from very grateful migrants who were able to successfully get residency in New Zealand. Kaya marami silang nalikom na halaga para mabili yung sacred icons. And then, just that very personal, treatment of having an airplane seat for the icon tells you that it is not just religious. There's some economy going on in this transaction. Not only that, hindi nag-iisa yung Santo Nino. That's why I put all the Santo Nino. Actually, kaunti pa ito, Christchurch ito eh. Mas marami yung sa Auckland na nakita ko mga Santo Nino. Isang pagkahaba-habang table with all the Santo Ninos. Where did they get it? Of course, they took it from home. And some enterprising Filipinos, business-minded Filipinos, also started selling Santo Ninos. So, may economy, no? Nandun yung economy. Now, in terms of Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, the Filipino food being sold outside St. John Cathedral illustrates that this is also a very, very economic activity. No? When they go and worship, there's an accompanying very, very alive economic activity. If you have read Lynch, when we talk about the fiesta, okay, the fiesta with the feria, no? The feria wherein all the things are being sold, may mga games, etc., etc. That is how St. John Cathedral is every Sunday, no? People go inside and worship, they come out and buy so many things outside available. And very, 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 very important in the public space. Malaysia is while it's true that there's freedom of religion in Malaysia, it is basically a Muslim country. And pork is not allowed in public spaces unless you put a sign, hindi, this is non-halal, no? But there's a bit of tolerance, in terms of the Filipino migrants because they're allowed to buy and sell, pork dishes in the sidewalks of St. John Cathedral. So there's some sort of accommodation in the host country in terms of the bawal. The approach to culture begins when the ordinary man and woman becomes the narrator. When it is he or she who defines the commonplace of discourse and the anonymous space of its development. That's coming from Desert 2. No? The Filipino diasporic place in Singapore continues to be narrated by the footsteps of the Filipino domestics. the common tao overseas, developed within the anonymous spaces of their resilience. In this sense, this is what I have always insisted. Ethnographers merely writes down the culture of the people they see. By the way, in the picture, you could see the Filipino chaplain of in Singapore. Undoubtedly, a shift towards mobility and deterritorialization has taken place in the last few decades, challenging anthropology to follow the trail of this movement. For some anthropologists at least, following this, in quotation mark, once natives in the diasporas thousands of miles away from their homelands are as worthy of attention as the search for the natives, in quotation mark, in native lands. And that's my main argument here now. Like, why do we study people who are outside the country, the transnational migrants? Let me just emphasize that the basics of ethnography remain the same, regardless of the subjects and location. What distinguishes the ethnography of mobile subjects, such as the transnational migrants, would be their cultural identity performance across national borders, beyond the control of the nation of origin and the disciplinary mechanisms of destination, nations, and countries. The Philippines cannot control what migrants do. They cannot regulate that. And that's why when you observe them overseas, what they do voluntarily must mean something. It must be important. If they go to the church every Sunday to socialize with their friends, to pray, to eat Filipino food, then that must be significant because no one is ordering them to do so. No one. And therefore, it becomes even more meaningful. Dito lumalalim ang diskusyon ng ethnography. Bakit? Why? This is the end of my presentation. Probably we can answer some questions. I'm just sorry that the link to, but if it comes out in the question and answer more, probably I can try to show it because I put it in one folder. Now, let me just say this. The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. I'm one of the activist anthropologists. If what I do does not make a difference, why should I do it? Make people be aware of diversity, to make people be aware of differences, and to make sure that difference does not mean insecurity, does not mean that your life will be threatened.
Thank you very much, Dr. Josefina Socorro F. Tondo and Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento, our resource speakers for this afternoon on Philippine ethnographies and ethnography at home and ethnography of mobile transnational subjects. So I think our resource speakers are now ready to answer questions from our participants. I actually received actually it's a text message or a chat message from Dr. Delmajin Abad of the College of Education. The question po is for Dr. In doing ethnography at home, how can the researcher do away with potentials for bias? Sir Juan?
Ano po yun? Potential?
Potentials for
Pakiulit
bias.
yung question.
Yes, Yes po. In doing ethnography at home,
Potential ano po?
potentials for bias po. Bias.
Biases. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Ang aking sagot kaagad diyan, to be able to get rid of biases is to be aware of them. That's the first step. Mahirap tanggalin ng bias, lalo na dahil ito ay bahagi ng pagkatao mo. Na-pick up mo ang mga biases mo along the way habang ikaw ay nakikipamuhay sa paligid. Sabi sa phenomenology, hindi dapat katakutan ng bias. Ito ay wag itago. Ilanta dito, make it explicit. I think that's the first step. Ngayon, ang iba pang pwedeng gawin ay i-admit mo and make it explicit. Tulad ng ginawa ko, sinabi ko kung ano mga assumptions ko. Hindi ko ito tinatago. At the very outset, inaano ko na. Ginagawa ko ng ini-state ko na kaagad. So isa yan. Yung anthropologist, habang siya ay nagkakaroon ng experience, nako-cultivate itong skill na to, yung pagpasok, to get out and in. Sabi nga ng iba, yung paa ng anthropologist, yung isa nasa loob, yung isa nasa labas. Kailangan parang labas-masok ka dun sa kultura. Papasok ka para dinig mo sila, makuha mo yung kanilang point of view, yung native na na pananaw, pero kailangan magdidistansya ka din. But then also tanggapin natin na never na magitayong tulad ng natives. At saka yung ethnographer, hindi niya kailangang subukang magpaka-native or maging katulad nung native na pananaw o na ugali o na feelings. Siguro yung empathy, yun yung magkaroon ng empathy dun sa tao na gusto mong maintindihan. Kasi never naman na maging katulad ka talaga nila. I think you get to ewan ko kay Ma'am Jo, pero sa akin hindi madali na mawala ang biases. Pero habang ikaw ay patuloy na gumagawa ng ethnography, habang ikaw ay lumulubog sa field, na-cultivate ang skill na to ang isa pa diyan, lumalawak yung pananaw mo. Yung paglawak ng pananaw mo sa mga bagay-bagay I think nawawala na yung mga biases. Hindi naman nawawala, kundi na panghahawakan mo na. Ganun po. Ganun po yung aking pananaw.
Thank you, Doc Mon. Ma'am Joy, you have something to say po about the question?
There are pros and cons now. Like if you acknowledge that you're part of, that you share some common, features of the culture of the one you're observing, then that's a plus, no? Kasi naintindihan mo in depth, no? I learned this when I was in Singapore. I was following the Simbang Gabi, no? And so there was one point wherein, talagang grabe yung tao ng Simbang Gabi, no? The church was always full. If you are late, then you cannot even get inside the church. So there was one Simbang Gabi that my time was totally wasted because I was just there outside the church looking in kung paano ako makakapasok. So the next day, I decided I would go early. Okay? And I went in as soon as the church was open, and I was able to find a seat a little bit near the front, pero ang daming mga reserved seats. Okay? And then I realized kung naiintindihan ko yung point of view ng mga Pilipino. Nagagalit yung mga Singaporean ushers. And the Singaporean ushers, were approaching the Filipinos who put their handbags, their umbrella, pati yata sapatos nilagay na para lang doon i-reserve doon sa mga kaibigan nila. Kaya while technically the church was still half empty, may mga reserve markers, no? So, and then very funny because in one simbang gabi, the ambassador herself was late. And so her seat was given, including her husband, her seat was given to the people na malapit dun sa seat niya. Kasi nag-start na yung mass, wala pa. Sabi ng mga Singaporean ushers, if the persons that you are, if their served seats have no one sitting down by the start of the mass, it will be given to the people, no? So gano'n. Anyway, pinaupo ngayon yung mga tao na malapit. Biglang dumating ngayon si ambassador, nag-i-start na yung misa. So nagkagulo, pinapaalis ngayon ng mga ushers yung Pilipino. Ang daming reaction, no, from my seat. No, I was about five rows away from the contested seat of the ambassador. And sabi sa akin, sabi nung isang nakatayo, ba't kayo aalis? Wala naman siyang kausap, no? Wala siyang kausap. She was just saying, ba't kayo aalis? Pag tayo ang nasa embassy, pinapapila tayo. Pag late tayo, nagagalit sila. Yung mga ganong conversations no, going on. I forgot the exact words. But the point is, I understood. Why? Because this is what we call parinig. You are not talking to anybody. You are just expressing an opinion. It is not directed at anyone. And therefore, it is what we call safe. And it actually saves the face of people who will be embarrassed by what you are saying. Wala kang kausap eh. If I were a foreign anthropologist, hindi ko alam yun. Sasabihin ko, minsan sisiraan ng bait dito sa loob ng simbahan. Ba't siya nagsasalita nang wala siyang kausap? Okay, this would be the process of sharing the culture of the people you're observing. But at the same time, yun nga, yung bias, no? Because the Philippines is actually very, very hard to govern. We are a very, very fractious people, very regionalistic, ang dami-daming mga alliances, no? And since I am a Filipino anthropologist in Christchurch, there are also factions among the Filipinos in Christchurch. Pag nakita kang kausap nung isa, ayaw kang kakausapin nung kabila. So it took a lot of effort on my part to really nurture friendships. Maraming tatanong sa akin, ba't natagalan yung fieldwork mo dito sa Christchurch? Ay naku, sabi ko, malahabang istorya. Ang hirap pumasok sa mga alliances ng bawat grupo. Especially if they know that you are close to certain people at you are talking to certain people. Grabe yung dudahan, no? And may biro pa nga yung mga Filipino doon. When somebody loses an election in a Filipino organization, the Filipino will just leave the organization and start a new organization. That's how fractious we are in the diaspora. If you think na we have a common Filipino identity, forget about it. It's actually a very, very fractious identity. But, the funny part is that all these fractious groups come together for the sinulog. Kaya nga, na-attract yung attention ko ng sinulog. Ano ba yung nangyayari dyan sa sinulog yan? Sa kayong Santa Cruz na yan? At bakit yung magkakaaway, magkakasama? Di ba? So it's actually a very, very good. So, bias, you cannot really eliminate it totally. You just need to, tama si Dr. Mon, you just need to be aware and still follow the rigors of the discipline in terms of honesty. Importante, and stick to the truth. Kung ano yung narinig mo, yun ang narinig mo, regardless kung sino yung nagsabi niyan.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We have another question po, still from Dr. Dalmajin Abad of the College of Education. How important it is to have sensibilities to observation in ethnography? How important it is to have sensibilities to observation in ethnography?
Ay, sino po ang... yung pag-observe napakahalaga. Again, this is something that you cultivate, no? To be able to to be able to see details that some other people will miss. Yung isang technique na ginagawa ko is you approach your subject for observation fresh as if it's your first time. So, pinapatry ko ito sa mga estudyante ko noon. Sa Lasal, they ride elevators going to classroom. So I tell them, come to the elevator as if it's your first time. And you're going to see things that you never saw before. Yung tipong mga bagay na taken for granted, nakikita na nila. Sabi nga kanina ni Ma'am Jo, look for the difference. I mean, anong meron dito? Anong kamangha-mangha? Anong kakaiba? I-suspend mo muna yung yung pananaw na alam mo na to. Mahirap din gawin yun kasi nga naman very familiar ka na, araw-araw ka nag-elevator, pero you try it and then you practice that kind of approach, no? Looking at things freshly as if it's your first time. Nade-develop yung observing faculties. Ang importante talaga mag-observe. The more details sa ethnography, thick description, literally thick kasi ang dami mo dapat na makikita. And then you see things all at the same time, nakikinig ka rin. Yung five senses mo gumagana. Like when you go to Quiapo, Diyos ko, the five senses will be engaged. May amoy, may lapot yung hangin. May naririnig mo yung ibang klase ng and then you even taste the air of Quiapo. So ganun po. Again, practice will teach you along the way how to become more and more keen in observing. Importante po talaga yung observation. Pag hindi ka masipag dyan, forget about anthropology or ethnography. Ganun po.
Thank you, sir.
Ma'am.
Okay. I taught at the Institute of Formation and Religious Studies for about 10 years now. And I taught sociology of change. So as part of the course, I asked my students to observe the marginalized sectors of society. Now, one group, a very creative group, I suppose, and probably the bravest of the groups, composed of some sisters. My students were mostly novices and juniors. The juniors are being prepared for final profession. So anyway, after that, I got this report in class. This group chose the prostitutes to observe. Alam niyo ba kung gaano kahirap maghanap ng mga prostitute diyan sa Cubao, no? Napakahirap na gawin yan. And even me, I just took my master's there. Wala pa akong anthropology degree at that time. Hindi pa ako pupunta sa UP Diliman. I was a young product of the Asian Social Institute. Young not in terms of age, but in terms of my, engagement with the discipline of sociology. And I realized that my students are braver than me. No? So marami silang insights, no? And then one sister said it all in her narrative. Ito yung narrative niya, sabi niya, at least from what I remember now. Sabi niya, I've always understood that prostitution is actually selling the body. No? The human body is being used, as a sex object. I've always understood that in my head, she said. But when I went to Cubao and I was there, observing the prostitutes, one man actually came to the bugaw. Alam niyo yung bugaw, di ba? Yung taga-benta ng mga girls, no? So, the customers don't go directly to the girls. They actually go to the bugaw, no? To get, the girls they want or the woman they want. Okay. Anyway, this man went to the bugaw and indicated her, yung sister. Siya yung gusto ng lalaki. And she heard the conversation. Magkano siya? While the conversation was going on, the man was looking at her from head to foot. And this is what she said. Now I finally understood how to be in the shoes of somebody being bought. Alam ko na ang pakiramdam pag ibinebenta ka. And that really made a very, very strong impression on her. Okay. And for a while, as we reflected, I had to debrief them because, of course, that's a very traumatic experience. Can you imagine somebody who is training to be a sister being muntik na, muntik na maibenta into prostitution until somebody intervened because they also had contacts. Kasi alam niyo naman, yung mga sisterhood, merong may mga contacts yan sa exposures into the prostitution side. Okay. Don't think that sisters are very, very innocent po. Marami sa kanila, a lot of them have undergone exposure to the very, very laylayan of society, and that actually was the reason why I had that course requirement, to take a look, walk in the shoes of the people within the laylayan of society. So ito lang yung importante. Importante yung sensitivity for you to have that self-reflexive understanding of what the situation is. Two, to know the meaning, what is the shared meaning? What is the shared meaning of prostitution there, What is the shared meaning of prostitution? I even heard it from my uncle. Na-shock talaga ako ng gusto kaya nga siguro grabe yung advocacy ko sa gender equality kasi from my uncle told me ay mabuti na yung may mga prostitutes, mabuti na yung may mga bailarina, may mga puta kasi pag wala sila, paano yung mga bubuting babae? Baka ma-rape sila, etc., no? And that's actually a reasoning that I have heard even among some faculty members, of the institutions where I taught. And that also includes, by the way, CNSC, So itong mga bagay, itong tawag natin, ang sinabi ko sa aking input is consensibility. What are our shared meanings? And if the shared meanings is really doing bad to certain sectors of society, then we should change these meanings. That's where anthropological activism comes in. Kaya nga importante that the anthropologist does not just look at culture as something that is fixed. That culture can change for the better. It is evolving. Sure, we preserve what is good, but at the same time, we need to be able to convince people that perhaps some things are worth changing for the better of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Jo. So we have here a question in the chat box, although naka-direct message. So the question is coming from Dr. Jocelyn Trinidad, the research coordinator of the College of Arts and Sciences. The question is, how do we ensure generalizability of findings in autoethnography? What are the common sources of data that we present in the discussions? Sir?
Okay, so kasi ako nag-present ng autoethnography. Yung issue ng generalizability, yun ba yung term?
Yes.
About findings, iba ang batayan kapag quantitative ang ginagamit mong method. Generalizability can be obtained kapag sabi sa quantitative, kapag yung anong tawag dito, yung sample mo has been drawn scientifically so that it's representative of the universe, of the universe population. Parang statistical ang batayan. Dito sa sa qualitative research in general and ethnography in particular, lalo na yung autoethnography kasi halos isa ka na lang na ikaw na lang, sarili mo pa yung anong tawag dito? Source ng data. Parang hindi masyado yung data mo, multi-source. Kaya talagang challenge, no? Na ma-convince mo yung reader na meron tong applicability na mas malawak kaysa dun sa sayo, di ba? Yun ang ibig sabihin ng generalizability yata. Merong applicability sa mas malawak na scope kaysa yung sayo lang. Something na very personal sayo yan. Ang masasabi ko diyan, una, yung resonance, no? Kapag binasa na yan ng reader, papasok sa isip niya, oh my God, tama to. Kasi nakaka-connect siya. Sabi kanina ni Ma'am Jo, yung may similarity, meron kayong common ground na na-hit, merong string na common ground, merong sound, merong tono na nag-hit at nakapag-identify ka. The more siguro na ito ay nagre-resonate sa mga readers o sa mga sa tawag dito yung pagbabasa ng ethnography, the more, it becomes valid. It becomes valid in the sense, yung findings mo valid in the sense na hindi ito sobrang unique, hindi naman ito sobrang kakaiba. In fact, very personal. Ang maganda nga doon, something very personal, pero meron siyang connection sa mas malawak. Kasi nga naman, I think yun yung anong tawag ko dito, yun yung pinanggalingan ng pananampalataya ng research. The assumption that somehow human experience is basically the same. We are beset with basically the same concerns. So yun, no? Although, kaya lang, ang sinasabi natin, importante sa qualitative research at sa ethnography na to take account of the difference, of the diversity, of the particularity. So, hindi dapat nawawala yung particularity kasi kapag nag-generalize tayo, usually din, no, kapag statistical, hanapin natin yung central. Nawawala na yung yung human face ng reality. Kaya I think doon sa punto na yon na it's something very personal yet it's something universal. Andun yung yung validity. It becomes valid or kasi yun naman yung esensya ng pagiging generalizable ng data mo ay valid siya. So the more na nakikita natin ang connection na to dun sa particular tsaka yung more universal, nakita natin ang connection na to, it lends more validity that, what we are talking very human and very intimate at the same time sa tao. So, hindi po statistical, no, ang pag-establish ng validity ng qualitative research, kundi ito pa yung kung saan ang mga tao ay nagkakaroon ng koneksyon, nakakakita ng connection dun sa mga findings ng ethnography. I think yun yung appeal ng ethnography. It's able, or ng qualitative research, it's able to come up with a good balance between the details and the big picture. So, yun po yung aking take dyan. Si Ma'am.
Thank you, Sir Mon. Ma'am Joy, you have anything to say about it?
Very, very simple kasi kanina sa chat box nag-comment si Jessie yung triangulation na. So it's okay. No, I have my own take in what is happening in a certain event, in a certain cultural aspect. But if you have seen, the methodology of Doc Mon Sarmiento, he also triangulated it with his grandparents, his parents, and the generation after him. So ibig sabihin, his experience is checked with the experiences of others, which is quite important, especially when you're doing phenomenological, the phenomenological approach, no? Yes, there's a certain sense of subjectivity, but we should also pay attention to intersubjectivity. Kaya nga, doon pumapasok yung consensibility, no? Consensibility meaning to say that we share certain things that are common to all humanity perhaps, or all Catanduanos perhaps, or all Cam Norteños perhaps, no? Like for example, in Cam Norte, we all know that the fish come from Mercedes. Alam natin lahat yan, di ba? And we share that. Pag biglang may kinakain ka, saan ito? Tapos sabihin, galing sa Mercedes, okay, that's fine. Paracale is okay kasi alam natin na malapit din sa dagat yung Paracale. But mostly, we know that gold comes from Paracale, di ba? Ganun yung yung may common knowledge tayo. Kaya pag biglang may naghukay ng ginto sa daet, tataas yung kilay natin. Kaya maraming chismis tungkol dun sa hukay diyan sa simbahan. Hanggang ngayon, naririnig ko pa yung chismis na yan na meron daw nakuhang ginto kasi pinahukay daw ni dating Pangulo before, etc. sa nag-treasure hunt. Maraming ang tinatawag natin diyan mga urban tales. Urban tales come out mainly because there is a breach of consensibility. Yung biglang may nangyayaring hindi natin alam kung bakit. So there are the urban tale explains, no? Explains kung bakit nangyari yung hindi dapat mangyari. And I think you will be hearing a lot from this from Daniel Yo, kasi he's an urban anthropologist, no? And he will be doing the visual anthropology, no? So ganito yung mga kasi by nature, human beings are rational. Okay? And when something is not rational, we try to find explanations. And either sa Pilipinas, either nagiging pamahiin, yung urban tale, or yung sa Quiapo. Maraming tatanong, ba't daw sa Quiapo, napakaraming gustong magpakulam ng bawat ng kapwa. Di ba? Maraming tanong. And in one discussion in our class among the class of Dr. Michael Tan, we realized because the justice system in the Philippines is so slow. Pag inapi ka, pupunta ka sa husgado, gagastos ka ng napakalaki sa abogado, kumisan wala pang nangyayari. Pumunta ka sa Quiapo, bumili ka ng itim na kandila, itirik mo, isumpa mo yung kaaway mo. And then, hindi man mangyari. Nakalabas yung galit mo, di ba? And that's, I think, one of the best. Kaya nga, I love, part of the reason why I love the class discussions in my anthropology class sa UP Diliman, before I went to New Zealand. Mainly because we are able to figure out certain explanations kung mga bagay na ginagawa ng mga Pilipino na mahirap maintindihan. Di ba? Are you getting me? Ganon yung natin. So we go to pamahiin, yung mga paniniwala, urban tales, etc., etc. Mainly because this is actually a search for rationality to find an explanation for something that probably is inexplicable. Kapareho na lang yung grotto sa daet. Ba't biglang nagkaroon ng grotto diyan sa simbahan na dati naman may grotto yan sa tabi, biglang napunta dun sa isang corner ng simbahan. Kasi sabi ng iba, hinukay. O bakit naman hinukay? O, marami ng urban tales yan sa daet. Hanggang ngayon naririnig ko pa. Kasi may nakuha daw dyan na ginto. Totoo ba? Hindi ko alam. I actually have no idea, but that's what I hear from conversations.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have another question here po. Good afternoon po. This is coming from Regine Balmaceda of the College, Ma'am Regine Balmaceda of the College of Arts and Sciences. Good afternoon po. Since researchers use in vivo in processing qualitative data, would it affect the credibility of the analysis result if the researcher resorts to the use of mano-mano method or not using any software to analyze the quality data?
Okay. Up to now, I have been resisting the use of ano to? Ano itong software? In vivo?
In vivo.
I know na
In vivo.
alam kong merong ganong software, pero pagdating sa ethnography, hindi siya masyado useful in the sense na you are dealing with a lot of data, pero iba-ibang ano niya. Mahirap ilagay lang sa isang anong tawag dito, sa isang database na mag-process nito. Yung iba-ibang cluster ng data nakakalap sa ethnography ay maaaring baka kailangang kanya-kanyang approach ng pag-analyze. Halimbawa, I use textual I use documents. So mga ilang lang naman yan, hindi yan ganun karami na para ilagay mo pa sa software. Mano-mano would be the best. And the other thing, nung tinitingnan ko yung in vivo, kung anong ginagawa niya, it's basically the mano-mano thing that we do, except that digitize, systematize na. But the mano-mano approach to analyzing, halimbawa, interview data, basically it works the same way as the computer category. Data, reduction, and then categories, and then, thematic, mga ganyan. It's basically the same. So ang ginagawa ng in vivo, basically kung ano ginagawa nung nagmamano-mano, siguro mas mahaba nga lang yung mano-mano, mas matagal. But basically it's the same process of processing. Same processing. It's the same processing that happens dun sa data. Ako, minamano-mano ko pa rin kasi gusto ko, ako magde-decide kung saan ko ilalagay itong category na to. I wouldn't, hindi ako masyado kumpiyansa doon sa software na siya magde-decide kung saan kakategorize. Dahil lamang doon sa mga marker, di ba? May mga marker na na-recognize ng computer. Nilalagay ng mga marker yung mga ini-splice ng mga ng mga phrases. I'd rather but kasi I enjoy. Ini-enjoy ko po yung itong proseso na to ng going through all this mga data, raw data, and then trying to make sense of them. Ini-enjoy ko eh. Ayokong mawala yun sa akin kasi bahagi sa akin yun nung tawag dito nung experience ng pag-research. Dealing with data, talagang you get a high. You get some kind of a high. Kasi nga sabi nga nila, the data are now talking to you. So parang ganyan. Okay lang. I have no issues about itong pero sa akin personally, I'd rather do it mano-mano. So yun po.
Ako naman,
ikaw, Ma'am Jo.
out of necessity, kasi nung nandun ako sa, I was given the University of Canterbury Award for Doctoral Scholarship. No? But it only covered yung academic work. It did not cover my research expenses. So, ang ginawa ko, ako yung nagtatranscribe, ako yung talagang mano-mano, ako talaga lahat yung gumawa. And so it took me about 6 months to transcribe all the interviews. No? Talagang pagkagaling sa fieldwork, talagang, minsan kasi yung mga interview, 1 oras, 2 oras, etc. So, mano-mano yun. At the time that I was through with the transcription, bigla namang inintroduce ng University of Canterbury yung in vivo. Kaya galit na galit ako kung kailan natapos.
Kailan natapos.
Saka sila biglang nag-i-introduce, tapos na ako, nag-a-analyze na ako, tapos biglang gano'n. But one thing is sure, no? Especially for the young researchers na sanay sa technology, probably it would help them. Ako, whatever helps is okay, no? For people like me, na medyo hindi ako masyadong techie, hindi ako techie savvy, mano-mano is also okay. Why? Because you actually, when you're interviewing people, you don't just record. You're actually noting down kung asan sila most passionate, no? And this is something that I learned from Fras Abaya, no? Yung anthropology of emotions, no? Where are, saan sila nagiging sobrang passionate? And that indicates to the anthropologists that this is something important. Titingnan mo yung facial expression ng nagsasalita, ano yung sinasabi niya. And I noticed nga, kaya nga na-establish ko yung trend na walang in vivo is because pagdating dun sa kaapihan, especially yung mga DWs natin sa Malaysia and Singapore, when they feel that they were oppressed, by their employers, they become very passionate. Nangingilid yung luha. Sometimes they cry, while they are telling you their story. And this is the reason why I know, even without in vivo, that this is something very, very important. Yung tao, the notion of tao, na hindi sila, kung tratuhin sila, the way they are treated is not like the treatment for human beings. Now, so yun ang trending yun dun sa aking mga interviews. Although, of course, there are some, especially yung isang interview ko na na-publish sa Ateneo, yung sabi ng isang Pinay doon na titignan kanila magmulang ulo hanggang paa at sasabihin nila, domestic worker. Bakit? Ano bang problema sa pagiging domestic worker? What is wrong, I use the translation kasi of course English yung gagamitin. What is wrong with being a domestic worker? And perhaps this is something that we can reflect on as Filipinos kasi yung tingin din natin sa mga kasambahay. Do you know that while we are fighting for the rights of the kasambahay, mga domestic workers sa Malaysia and Singapore, sa Pilipinas, hindi pa natin ipinapasa yung batas natin para sa kasambahay. At the time that we are protesting about the hanging of floor contemplation, wala naman tayong batas para protektahan ang mga kasambahay natin dito sa Pilipinas. And this is where I'm saying that, this is anthropology. Anthropology that challenges society. Anthropology that reveals the truth. At those are the truths that I discovered that while I was doing my interview among the domestic workers, I realized na walang protection ang ating mga domestic workers dito sa mismong Pilipinas. So how can the government even lobby for a better treatment ng mga domestic workers kung dito sa mismong Pilipinas wala pang ipinapasa na batas?
Thank you very much, Ma'am John. And I think we don't have questions in the chat box anymore unless yung mga kasama natin sa Zoom would like to ask question, you can just raise your hand. Kung meron pong gustong magtanong, yung mga nasa Zoom. Wala na po yata. So,
the evaluation forms, the evaluation link is already being shown in the chat box. So please answer the evaluation. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So at this point, we are going to award the certificate to our resource speakers. Allow me to read the citation. This certificate of commendation is awarded to Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento in grateful recognition of his distinguished and invaluable service rendered as resource person during the Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop held on July 15, thereby contributing immeasurably to the prestige and success of the event. Given this 15th day of July 2021, signed, Director Ferry T. Bernal Seso 3, OIC President, Director CHED Region 5. So we virtually award the certificate to Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento. Same certificate of commendation is awarded, of course, to our Vice President for Research and Extension, Dr. Josefina Socorro F. Tondo. All right, so we are still being joined by, nakita ko po si Sir Ellie and Ma'am Susana kanina. Thank you very much po. So, please join us again tomorrow for the second day of this Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop. We'll be having 2 modules. We have Module 3 on Indigenous People of the Philippines and by Maria Mangahas and Jessie Varquez. And we have Module 4 in the afternoon, Village, Community, and Annual Cycle by Cynthia Zayas and RV Banyas. So please join us again tomorrow at 9. We'll start at 9 po. So may I request everyone to please turn on your video for the documentation, please. Our technical staff to please take the picture. All right, so smile. 1, 2, 2. Smile again for the second one. 1, 2, and 2. And next is 1, 2, and 2. Okay po. So that's it. Our evaluation link is by module po, by module. So the evaluation link will be sent by our technical staff, the OV Press staff. And then what else, Ma'am Jo? Do we have any announcement po? Wala naman.
Make sure that you register per module because certificates will be given per individual module. Para naman yung hindi kayang i-attend yung lahat ng modules, will still get certificates. So, pag umattend siya sa ngayong hapon, meron siyang certificate. And hopefully that counts sa NBC 461.
Yes, ma'am.
Alam ni Dr. Mon yan.
Okay po. Again po, please register every module, and then evaluate po for you to have the certificate. Right.
Another thing is I will be giving assignments after the module. I will post some requirements in the group chat. Ganon din si Dr. Mon, Doc Mon, kung gusto mong magbigay sa kanila ng brief assignments lang for exercise lang. Probably we can give it as a requirement to them para may isasubmit sila sa atin as part of this module. Okay, thank you.
Okay po. So that concludes our first day of doing ethnography seminar workshop. Again, I'd like to thank our resource speakers for today. Right, we have Ellie Giab, Suyen Roldan, Dr. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento, and of course, Dr. Josefina Socorro Tondo.
I have seen Dr. Maria Manahas as well. I saw her coming at a certain point. So she will be giving the indigenous peoples of the Philippines bukas. Okay.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, so hi ma'am. And to all the participants, our research coordinators, our deans and directors, to each and everyone, thank you once again and mabuhay po tayong lahat. We're all waiting.
Thank you, Doc Mon. Maraming salamat. Huwag mong kalimutan
My pleasure. Salamat. At ako'y
collaboration natin nasa Katsu sa si NSC.
Ma-message na lang ako.
Sige.
Okay.
Let's collaborate. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you po. Thanks everyone. God bless po.